I was working on a startup in Manhattan, and we didn't make it. And so eventually we had to close the doors and give the key to the landlord and then retreat to the country, which I did. And I said, I want to get out of here and get away from the world. I want to put a backpack on my shoulders and just head up the canal. And I don't know where I'm going to go, but maybe I'll get to. Sorry. Maybe I'll get to the Appalachian Trail. So anyway, I did put the pack on my back, and I went up the towpath, and it was one of those terrible hot June weeks, and I got as far as the Mountainside Hotel, where I checked in. And they gave me clean sheets and breakfast the next morning, and they charged the going rate, $3.50. Now that Thompson owns it, it may change rates. But at any rate, I stayed there, and the next night I went to Rivinus, and then I went on to the Appalachian Trail. And I thought, gee, that's nice up there, but the towpath and the canal are absolutely magnificent. They have beautiful landscape, they have history and culture, and somebody ought to write a book about the canal. So I did. And this was in 1964 when I put out a little book called The Wayfarer's Guide to the Delaware Canal. And I got maps in the back and the story of the canal, and I was absolutely delighted. And I took it to local stores, and they sold out. And so then I did a second edition, which happens to be this one. And I think it sells for $1. At any rate, that issue ran out, and so I brought out the third edition, and that sold out. And then I went to the fourth edition, and that sold out. And I went to the fifth edition, and that sold out. And I went to the sixth edition, and that sold out. And I went to the seventh edition, and that sold out. And then I went to the eighth edition, which I just happen to have a copy here. And I was about to take on the ninth edition when I talked to Susan Taylor at the Friends of the Delaware Canal, and she said, well, nobody reads books anymore. It's all online, and everything is there already. All your stuff is online. I said, oh, okay. Well, maybe I should retire after 50 years of publishing and peddling this book. But the seventh edition, or eighth edition, is really fun because I have pictures in here by Louis Comfort Tiffany. Louis Tiffany went up the canal in 1886, and actually he was wooing a fair young maid who became his second wife, and he'd lost his first wife. And he took some of the very first photographs of the Delaware Canal. So it is fabulous in the recording, and I was able to get the images from the Canal Museum in Easton, and they're quite wonderful of what he saw at that time. And so that was fun. But then I got inspired, and I was interested in Indians in general. And so I found a map of Bucks County with Indian sites on it. And it was put together by a lady named Anna Shoemaker. So I tried very hard to contact her for permission to use her map. And I couldn't find her, but I eventually got her lawyer. And I talked to her lawyer, and he laughed, and he said, well, you're welcome to do whatever you want, because Anna has moved to Paris to the good life, and she's long since forgotten the Indians of Bucks County. So I proceeded. Now, there are all kinds of pictures of Indians in here, and a map, her map originally, of the sites. This becomes particularly interesting because the bulk of the Indian sites for the county are between Fleecy-Dale, which is Carversville to Lumberville, on down to Bowman's Tower and Bowman's Hill. And this is particularly fertile land. It's also wonderful land for the drainage of the streams down there. Now, that's both good and bad when it comes to storms. But the Indians were smart enough to live here. And there were many more Indian communities in this area than there were farther north in Tinicum or Nakamixon and or the other area, upper lower Makefield. So this became a successful book in its own right, and I have a lot of information about Indian villages in here. And that was fine. And then I got further intrigued, and I found the texts of William Penn's letters back to London. Now, he was a very nice guy, but he was a real estate developer, let's face it. So he wrote back to London, and he was quite fair. He was not overly promoting the landscape that he had acquired from Charles II in 1682. But he wrote very fair letters and honest letters about the Indians that lived in this part of the world. So I used his letters to define what he saw of the Indians in Bucks County. And he did a splendid job. And this book came out, and this is virtually out of print, but it's been popular. I thought that I would sell them all to the high school kids, but they get it online anyway, so they don't need me. Anyway, I had fun with the Indians, and that kept me going. And then I used the Indian Image, which is the Indian down in New Hope, to write a book about the early taverns of Bucks County, otherwise subtitled "One Beer and 100 Bars." And at that time, I had an MG TD, little sports car, divine car. My children wanted to take it away from me in due course.
We wanted to drive it.
Yes, well, the trouble is you had to have small feet, because otherwise you could put your foot on the throttle and the brake at the same time. Anyway, I had a deck of 3x5 cars in the glove compartment, and as I went around, I tracked the early inns. And I did it by way of following the old roads around here. The River Road, the Durham Road, Upper York Road, which of course was Upper New York Road, but they couldn't carry all of that on the sign, so it's now Upper York Road. Incidentally, the crossing at Center Bridge to Stockton predates the crossing at New Hope. So this one was about 1712, and New Hope was around 1720. Anyway, I had a glorious time scrounging around the county and recording all the information about the early taverns. And then a buddy of mine did the illustrations inside, which make it all the more pertinent. And so this was a great project and went on for a while. And it sold for all of $3.50. Now, I have to point out that putting out these books was a self-supporting hobby. That my objective was not to make $1 million, but to cover my cost of typesetting and pictures and illustrations and printing as it went along. So on the overall basis, after the last 50, 60 years, I think I've come out even, and that's great for a hobby. It's better than antique cars. I tried that one too. But
Is that book still in print, Will?
Yes, it's over there. Incidentally, I have just a few boxes left of books that I haven't sold, and I can't sell them anymore, partly because of the pandemic, partly because the bookstores have all changed management, and they want fresh dates on all their books. And my books, the taverns, it's the same as it was 20 or 30 years ago. The Black Bass has changed, but many of the others have just gone out of business. So the record is still true, but they haven't. The stores don't think it's fresh stock, so I can't really sell many of the books that I've left. I have 3 titles, and they're all over there on the table. And when you leave the party, take whatever you want that you're interested in. You're welcome to them. This was the next one I worked on, called New Hope, Pennsylvania. And I worked with a man named George Bailey. George Bailey was the mayor of New Hope, and we were due to have the mayor here today from New Hope, since he just won another session. But I haven't seen him. At any rate, George Bailey was the mayor. As they'll all tell you, you don't make much money as mayor of New Hope. So he had secondary jobs. He was a school bus driver, and that probably paid for most of his life. But in addition, he was a concert timpanist. He played drums for the Bucks County Symphony Orchestra. And he was a photographer, and I found that he had a stack of photos that I worked to amplify to make this book on New Hope. And the final characteristic was that he was the Commodore of the New Hope Yacht Club. And in its day, they were small boats that used to sail back and forth across the Delaware River. And that was kind of fun. We at least have a picture of him sailing his boat. This is a wonderful picture of the symbol of the Friends of the Delaware Canal. Any of you that see any of their literature or any of their publications, this is a canal boat with a mule up front and a boy in back and laundry hanging out. This was a metal sign that was over the towpath house on Mechanic Street in New Hope 1,000 years ago. And I spotted it one day and I said, this is really great. And so we photographed it and then kind of cleaned up the background. And this has since become the picture for the Friends of the Delaware Canal. Much more interesting than any of the other canals of America. But there are all kinds of pictures in here. Some of them are getting a little dated now, but it tells what New Hope looked like in the 1970s. So this was great fun to do. And then we have old stonework in Bucks County. Now, when I moved in here in 1953, a lot of the stonework needed to be repaired, and this building needed to be rebuilt. So I talked to my friendly stonemason, Elmer Strauss, who's no longer with us, but was the leading stonemason of the county. And I said, Elmer, in addition to just pointing the walls, would you give me a square? A square is 6 feet by 6 feet square. Give me a square on the back of this wall out here of everything you've ever pointed. And the point of that is that the stonework is the same across that back wall, but the different pointing along the way has a totally different character and shows what the pointing can do to highlight your stone. I recommend you go to see it, but maybe not today because there's a certain amount of poison ivy back there. However, you can see a certain amount of stonework here. Now, on the walls, it's called barn dash. And then on the poles on either side, it is ribbon point. And part along in here is called colonial ridge point. And so there are at least 3 that you can see right here beside you. And in the back of the book are examples of the others that he put on the walls for me. And again, the MGTD came to great value because I went around and kept notes and kept my 3x5 cards. So this is, it is not a brand new edition, but it is totally reliable and appropriate to this day. The first photographer, whose name will come back in just a minute, any rate, he charged me the going rate for a day's photography, and that was fine. And then, as the years went by and I wanted to reproduce the book, I went to him and I said, can I use the old negatives that are sitting there in your file drawer? And he said, yes, Will, but I will charge you $40,000 for the use of this.
Whoa.
And I said, hello? Because I've never made $40,000 on all the publishing that I've ever done. So I went down the road to Buckingham and cornered Randall By. Randy By lives down there, or I believe still lives down there. And so Randy and I went out and we did scene for scene, picture for picture, and duplicated the original book. And he charged me a day's rate for a photographer. And we have now the second edition that is a little bit larger. Anyway, that was fun to do. And, I found another map from a man in Stockton, and I tried to check him out, but unfortunately he was deceased, so I figured he wouldn't really argue with me about using a map that he did of all the old mills along the Delaware River. Now, again, I mentioned that there is a landform difference between above Fleecy Dale in Tinicum, Tohican, and so forth, up versus below Bowman's Hill, when it gets flatter and it gets a sandy soil and the water goes right on through. But our particular section here is very good for old mills, and even along Catalasa there were 5 mills at one time. The first guy turned his wheels with the water backed up, and he released the water to the second man, who backed up the water, and then he released it and turned his wheels, and then it released it to the third man, and so forth on down. So there are a great many mills in this particular area, and I did a little bit more research along the way and had the fun of producing old mills of New Hope, Salisbury. It also includes the Great Battle between Benjamin Parry and William Marras. Marras you'll probably never have heard of because he took issue with Parry and went to court. And for 12 years, they fought it out in court in New Hope. And ultimately, Marras lost. And so he had to leave town and ultimately went bankrupt and died in Philadelphia. But in the days of the early 1830s, he helped to build the hotel, which has since become PNC Bank and is Starbucks in New Hope. He also built mills along the Ingham Creek there, and he built the silk mill, which is at the corner of Aquatong and the railroad. And he also had a wire cable winding business in there. Most interesting of all, he built a very handsome house, without doubt the most handsome house in New Hope. Parry's house is fun. It's absolutely traditional. It's exactly what you want and expect for a Quaker house. Maris's house is called Sintra, and it's the building across the street from the high school. It is perfectly beautiful as a design. It is uniquely, city-type design. And in the front hall is a parquet floor with a star bust that is staggeringly beautiful. Unfortunately, the house, I think, is rented at this point. I'm not sure what's going on, but nobody's putting any real money into it. So it's slowly deteriorating as time goes by. And the tragedy is it's the most handsome house in the whole New Hope area. It was clearly designed by a city architect. In those days, which is early 1830s, America did not have the greenback dollar that you have in your pocket now. The United States government had not yet issued its own currency. And so Mr. Maris established and printed his own currency, and that was quite common for businesses at the time. He called his operation the Lepanto, Lepanto Mills. And not only do I have pictures of the mills, but I have pictures of his currency, which is what he paid his workers with. And it says that in those days, 25 cents, thank you, 50 cents, was a big deal. And you were issued that at the end of the week or the month, and you could cash that in to the store for buying your groceries. But it's all local currency that was issued between Philadelphia and New Hope. So it was kind of fun to be able to find it. My great piece of work was the complete guide to the Delaware and Lehigh Canal. In 1988, Ronald Reagan signed into law the National Heritage Corridor, which we are part of here, between Jim Thorpe, as it's called now, or Mauchunk, on down through Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, and then on down to Bristol. And I became the first federal commission chairman, which was great fun, because it's fascinating for going from the Appalachians down through Upper Bucks, through the Piedmont district that we're in here, and on down to the sand and gravel of Yardley, Morrisville. And so I had a marvelous time as the head of the Corridor Commission until my wife, Ann, who's up above, tapped me on the shoulder and said, you have a wife and 2 children. And I said, oh dear, that's too bad.
Hey!
I really love this job, and I would still be with this job under other circumstances. So rather than being able to stay with the corridor, I retired after 2 years, but I wrote the book. And this is a marvelous survey study of that entire corridor, which was based on moving coal from the Poconos on down to Bristol and then either to New York or Philadelphia. And it covers the Lehigh Valley, and we don't really pay much attention, but the Bethlehem Steel Company before 1900, they were still inventing steel. Between 1900 and 1950, Bethlehem Steel was the largest steel and iron producer in the world. And there's magnificent equipment still up there to see. After 1950, the mantle changed and went down to Bristol, to the Fairless Works. And that became the largest steel plant in the world. It just happens that we reduced Krupp in Germany to a smaller operation during the 1940s. So anyway, this covers steel, it covers iron, it covers railroads, it covers the construction of major buildings, it covers the culture of the communities along the way. Incidentally, New Hope was the largest manufacturing town in Pennsylvania between the time of the Revolution up to about 1835. Why? Because in 1835 coal came in and started to create steam. And so we were operating on streams turning wheels before 1835. After 1835, the coal all went to Philadelphia, and we built a lot larger industrial operations down there. But at any rate, this is, to me, is a fascinating survey of this fabulous part of the history of America. Anyway, I published that. I think we did about 3,000 copies, which naturally sold out. And then my successor came in, and nice guy. I met him at lunch one day, and he said he'd written a book about a teenage boy and a teenage girl and their dog and how they lived on a canal boat going down the river. And for that, the state education authorities authorized 100,000 copies. And I thought, gee, they just don't really appreciate how much heritage and beauty we have in the neighborhood. But life moves on, and I went back to Manhattan to earn a living. This was the next one I worked on, which was Barns of Bucks County, with Jeff Marshall, who was at that time the head of the Bucks County Conservancy, which became Heritage Conservancy. He became president, and now he's retired. And we had a glorious time together investigating barns as they were constructed by the English and the Germans in this part of the state. And we had lots of pictures, including pictures of this one, and the explanation of how they were built and how they have been preserved ever since. So, needless to say, we sold out again. This time we printed in China, and so that was an interesting experience by itself. But this is out of print, and both Jeff and I decided that we didn't want to do the peddling that went with selling the copies. So this was it, and we didn't do any more. Then I got involved in 4 little books in my own neighborhood. And the first one was, well, they're in order: Lumberville, Catalasa, Center Bridge, and Phillips Mill. And since I live here, and since I have a relative knowledge of the area, I was able to put it together. A couple of comments along the way. Lumberville, of course, had a river road where the canal is now. But along came the engineers of the canal, and they said, "Excuse me, sir, would you mind moving your road," that's where the canal is now, "move it up the hill on the other side of your houses?" So that was done, and as you drive through Lumberville, you'll see that many of the houses are all white and very similar. Those were worker houses for the stone quarries along the way. Then I did Catalasa, and as I mentioned earlier, there were 5 mills along the creek. So that was kind of fun to study them, and I had the help of some engineering work that had already been done to put it together. The next one was Center Bridge, and we know of the great fire that took place there, the burning of Center Bridge. And of course, the problem in 1829, I think, if I could read my own writing. Anyway, the bridge burned, and of course, the water flowed happily underneath it, but they couldn't pump the water out of the river up onto the bridge to put the fire out. So the old wooden bridge was destroyed and subsequently replaced by the bridge that you see. I would also point out, I don't know whether you did mention that you had friends that lived where the pipeline goes through.
Right.
All right, the first transcontinental sort of pipeline from Oil City, Pennsylvania to Bayway, New Jersey went right through here. And at one time there were 41 oil tanks just below Center Bridge. So you can still smell a little of the oil, particularly in a summer day when it's hot and a little damp. The other thing that's a little bit fun is Dilly's. Dilly's hot dog stand, except that it wasn't quite Dilly's, the next prior owner. It was spelled Dille, and his name was Lester Dilly, or Deal, if you please, because he was French, and he came to this country to enjoy life and presumably make his fortune. He I think, bought the operation that was there, and the one thing he really loved was flipping hamburgers. And so he did that, and he commuted up from New Hope, where he lived, to Center Bridge in his Rolls Royce every day. And he parked the Rolls Royce next to the hot dog stand and did happily for a long time until eventually he got bored with it and then moved on. I don't know where he ended up, but it had been Dille apostrophe S until they changed to the Y in the present owner. Then there's the Phillips Mill, and I've been a member of Phillips Mill since early 70s, maybe late 60s. I've been on stage in the Phillips Mill. I designed stage scenery for the Phillips Mill. My wife Ann was deeply involved with the art show in Phillips Mill. So at one point I went to the board and I said, all your records are in this back room on the staircase going down, and they're all a mess and nothing is being done to preserve them. I will volunteer to sort them out, arrange them, and ultimately box them, and write a history of Phillips Mill, which I proceeded to do. Lucky I did, because the next year we had another of the great floods. The water came up to above the main floor of the mill, and every inch of where I was drawing records was flooded, and it would have been just pulp material. But I got it all out, and ultimately all the records of the mill back to 1929 are now in the Spruance Library of the Mercer Museum. So I felt that I had accomplished something for the good, and then I put out the little book with pictures of the mill. And then, first is the collection of books, which is over there to haul away. And then you will notice that there are models. That's a Russian church there, generic, and there are others on the wall next to Tim and Richard's house. And I have built all these models over the years, supposedly in the long winter nights. I'm not quite sure what that means. But at any rate, I have built over 125 models over the years. And I invite you to sign up on the clipboard over here with your name and email address, and we will send you a show that I created with Betsy's help this year of Americana, of all the models that are part of Americana. But if you go over to the wall, you'll see Notre Dame de Paris and Chartres and a circular barn, a shaker barn, and I have lots more. So if you get inspired and you want to go through the office, I have probably the English collection all out of London Bridge. It does fall down. It is 7 feet long, so I can't store it. So, but I have St. Paul's Cathedral and the Tower of London and others in there. You're welcome to wander through and see. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. And my problem was that there were more horses than there were visitors at the show, and that somehow we weren't reaching any public. So we put together the original car show. But Chuck Renfro did the artwork, and I think he's long gone.
But not the car show. The car show lives on.
Well, it was both were fun. The book was fun, and he did glorious artwork. But for one of the things that he showed, and is to be noted, is he showed a bar room, ostensibly the Black Bass, which had a bar room. I think they've taken it out now. It's part of Grant's office. But it was a cage design with wooden bars, and that's where they kept the alcoholic beverages. And at night, they put the lock on it and closed it so nobody got in it, but the liquor was kept behind bars, and that's the origin of the term bar room. Yes.
The contexture of New Hope is changing the last couple of years compared to what the charm that many of us have been used to over many decades. What are your thoughts about the changes that we're currently seeing in New Hope, and how might some of the history and the charm of yesteryear somehow still be preserved?
I'm hoping somebody else does a book on New Hope. We did it with George Bailey in 1972, and the sub-reason of it was that I had gotten married in 1971 to a lovely lady from Boston, and I said, you don't know about my world that you're moving into. So we combined with George Bailey to reproduce his pictures and take some more. As far as the changes to New Hope, now that I'm married to Dickie Ann, we don't go to New Hope. Now, it's not uniquely discriminatory, but the grocery store is out in the shopping center or down at the Giant. Almost everything the hardware store is in Lambertville. The dry cleaner is out in the shopping center. So the things that used to be in New Hope, particularly the hardware store, don't exist anymore. So I don't pay much attention. On the other hand, I read the Herald faithfully, and I see a tremendous amount of money coming into New Hope. And if you think of the history of New Hope, it was a manufacturing town, as I mentioned. It then died and became ultimately an art town, and that's kind of faded away. The artists can't afford it. And now it's a tourist town, and I am told the restaurant prices are a little dear. I can let Tim comment accordingly on that. But it's becoming a very high scale, expensive visitor town. So we don't see as much of it. I was hoping the mayor would be here, but he can speak to it. All of these subjects, I feel perfectly satisfied. I have done my job in my time, and it's somebody else to take off and decide that I did a lousy job and that they can do better. Because I had collections of books, maps, charts, drawings, etc. And the half that related to the Delaware Canal are now at the Canal Lockhouse in New Hope, and the other half are at the Salisbury Township Historical Society over here in Salisbury. So I've kind of house cleaned what I had. I can't really comment beyond that on New Hope, except that it is basically more expensive across the board. And I guess that's preserving it, and will preserve it for the future. Whether we can afford it or not is quite immaterial. You've got Richard and I've got Dickie Ann, and so what difference does it make? Anyway, it's fun. Anybody else?
Yes, I'm really interested in the tribes and the Indians of New Hope, because a few years ago I tried to do some research and I did not come across your book, which I'm excited to be able to access today. But I was also curious about the evolution, or the dying out of the Indian tribes and the ethnicity that grew in the area at the time, at least some pieces that I read about it. So I'm curious if you have any insights.
But of course, William Penn was marvelously honest and direct with the Indians and treated them as equals. Whether that's totally true is immaterial, but he treated them as equals and fairly. His sons and James Logan Square, helped the Indians to move west more forcibly than we would like. In 1737, the walking purchase took place, and we drove them west. From there, the Lenape split, and half of them went to Canada and intermingled with the Indians up there, the Algonquins, and the other half went out into Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and essentially married into tribes out there. There is a lovely lady who appears periodically, and she's even written in the Herald, written about in the Herald, and she comes back and she says, I am a pure blood Lenape, and I don't think so, but I'm not going to stand up in front of her and say so, because they were all totally intermingled and as a tribe demolished as it went west. And so what I was trying to capture was the conditions of the time of William Penn, even before William Penn, during William Penn, the time of his children, and then they're gone. I think I have that one over here, so you're welcome to stay up late tonight.
I will.
Well, it was a sad but fascinating story, and a very human story. I mean, we've beaten up the Indians out west ever since, and it's not so new. Anyway, anyone else? Yes.
Could you recap again about the beautiful mansion in New Hope opposite the garden centre? That's in disrepair right now.
Sintra.
Centra.
Talk about Sintra.
Sintra.
Can you just give us a recap on what's happening with that again?
No, I've done partial research. The rest of the story is in Philadelphia, because he had operations and a house in Philadelphia. Where he came from, what money he brought, Why he built an elegant house in New Hope, I don't know. I know that he fought with Benjamin Parry, and that has to do with the flow of Aquitaine Creek. And the game was that if Parry had the dam at the playhouse, and it was so high, if he put another board or two on top, he increased the flow on his wheel, which is the playhouse and the backside of the theater. But if he did that, the water upstream flattened out and slowed down and didn't help Maris. Now, if, for argument's sake, Parry dropped the wall at the playhouse, then there was a more significant drop of the water, and that helped Maris's mills turn their wheels. And so the argument by Maris was that Parry unfairly increased the size of the dam, so the water was then flowing very slowly and doing nothing to turn his wheels. What is, to me, fascinating is Maris came in with money and architect and some sort of Portuguese experience. What, I don't know. But he called it the Lepanto Mills, which I think is Portuguese. He named his house Sintra, and I had people go to Portugal to explore the royal houses, and they find nothing that's any vaguely similar. I was hoping that somebody would do the research down to Philadelphia. I don't think I'm quite going to do it anymore, but I think there's a tremendous story there of an untold man and success who built a lot of mills in New Hope, which I record. I have that part. I have the local scene, and I know about the 12-year law case, but I don't know very much about Mr. Maris.
Just out of curiosity, was Sintra S-I-N-T-R-A, like the town in Portugal, or?
I'm sorry, look.
C.
How's it spelled?
How is it spelled? Centra. How is it spelled?
Cintra.
Okay, because that's so interesting, because there is a very ancient community in Portugal called Sintra. Yeah, S-I-N-T-R, yeah.
There's a lot more to the story, and at this point, I don't think I can pursue it, but I hope to stimulate somebody to do it, because there's a lot more going on, and he is the unknown name in New Hope. Anyway, more wine, more food.